This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook Volume 2, and today is February 19th, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
Hey, I'm Marc Ernay. I was at Hofstra Radio from 1986 till 1988, and then every once in a while I still show up.
Absolutely. And thank you for coming back, first of all, and doing another interview with me. It's always a thrill to talk to you. And the second part is, you say you show up once in a while. When, you follow Hofstra Radio people on Facebook or social media, you are always there. You are one of those people who cheerleads for the students who are there now, for the alumni, for the organization generally. You are one of the people that, in my opinion, is just such a stalwart of the community, and on behalf, I think, of everybody else, I just want to say thank you for being so enthusiastic and just being such a great member of the community.
There's another $10 in your Venmo, Brian. No, really, thank you,
Only
thank you
10.
for that. Well, we're a minute in. Who knows? Who knows how much more? But no, seriously, it's nice of you to say that without any actual prompting. And it's important to me to do that because I think back to my own days as an undergrad and starting out at RHU, and we really didn't have that to the level that I ever thought we should. And
Hmm.
when you look at what's going on there now and how so many of not just the recent alum, but the guys even before me to an extent are gung ho on contributing what they can. I look at it as, certainly paying forward, but there's a tinge of regret because it wasn't really done for my generation at the station. And I kind of wonder how different, my path might have been. Not that I'm complaining about where I am now. I love
No, no.
where I am now. And I don't think I would trade all of the experiences that I was able to enjoy or suffer or both on the path, but it just would have been nice, I think, to kind of have some semblance of a pipeline
Hmm.
established, and now they do, which is great, but 35 years ago that certainly was not the case, at least not in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, some people will go through that and say, well, no one helped me, or I didn't have a support network, so I'm just going to do what I do. Or you could go the other path and be encouraging and be a link in helping people find jobs and opportunities, or just being supportive, just writing happy birthday, or just commenting on people's posts, or just being part of the network. You've gone the opposite way, and you've been a leader in the community. And again, I can't say enough thank yous, because it's just inspiring
No,
completely.
it really is nice of you to say that. Thank you, and I appreciate it, and I expect to continue to have some hand in what happens with WRHU in whatever form it takes over the next. I'd like to think I'm still going to be around for another 3 or 4 decades. I don't have any plans to go anywhere anytime soon.
Well, let's hope so. We do appreciate you. So let's get back to your undergraduate days. Did you have any titles or positions at the station?
I don't think I did. Certainly not on the board,
Hmm.
but I did have the distinction. I don't know if I was the first set of co-hosts, but I was definitely in the first um, calendar year, or at least the first school year of co-hosts for Good Morning Hofstra back in the day. Thank you, Sue Zizza.
Hmm.
Um, I got to work with Jason Levy most weekday mornings, and we had a again, interesting experience. I'm not sure he remembers it quite as fondly as I do, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that I had some extracurricular things going on too that helped to lighten the mood.
Got it. Got it. I guess we'll get into that, hopefully, like cryptic message there. But let's talk about, like how, were you interested in doing a morning show? Because there was no morning show prior to this. You guys were the first. So I guess my question is two-part. Like, how did that come about, and how did your interest in that come about?
Honestly, I wanted to learn how to do as much as I could while I was at the station. I wanted to be as versatile as possible, knowing that, trying to land a professional play by play gig fresh out of school was going to be nearly impossible. Much easier now because of the glut of outlets and
Hmm.
platforms, again, that didn't exist back in the spring and summer of 1988. But it was that, trying to branch out and learn as much as I could. I did some news reporting, obviously. I was a sports guy, spun jazz and classics, as most of my cohorts did back in those days. And I just wanted to be able to be as valuable to a prospective employer as I could be without pigeonholing myself. And one of the opportunities that arose was not just the chance to co-host a morning show, but it was a paid position too. And I said, hey,
Hmm.
theoretically, this could be my first foray into professional radio, and that's very much how Sue approached it as the executive producer and the puller of the purse strings, if you will, and working with Jason, who was very proficient at what he did, very skilled. I think we developed a fairly solid rapport very quickly. And even though, my involvement with the show only lasted one semester, I think we had a good time. I think the Hofstra community got something out of it. And I got some spending money, which was nice.
Yeah, yeah. It's there weren't many paid positions at the time at the station. I think it might have just been station manager and program director. So this was a new budget line, and you mentioned Sue a couple of times. That I think she come back to the station just before that. And one of her directives was to create that morning show. Do you remember much else about who else was like in the executive board, or who else was in management at the time?
I just remember it was Jeff Krause as the GM,
Hmm.
and I think it was almost a direct linkage from Jeff to Sue to the talent.
Hmm. Okay. Um, so when you signed up to do this, the way I think when Jason talked about this, I think he was saying that you might have done the spring semester. Does that sound right?
Yes, absolutely. It was my last semester before graduation.
So did Sue approach you? Did you have an interest in this? How did it come about that you got this gig? And my secondary question is, were you a morning person? Were you someone willing to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and get over there and do a radio show?
I was up from the night before most of the time. That's what made it fun. And that's a true story too. I can't remember the specific details of how it came to be, but I have a feeling it was probably something that might have been posted on one of the bulletin boards in
Hmm.
the station office in Memorial back then. And when I saw paid position, it probably opened my eyes a little wider. And
Hmm.
I don't know if there was any sort of audition process. I can't recall that. But I do remember thinking there probably wouldn't be very many people interested in getting up at that hour to first prep and then go on the air for a show that I think we started at 6 or might have been 7 a.m. Either way, I was in usually around an hour or so before we first hit the air. So, I would have been in anywhere between 5:30 and uh, or between 4:30 and 5:30 for a show that started either at 6 or 7. I had taken 8 o'clock classes from freshman year on, uh, not by choice
Hmm.
mostly,
Hmm.
but that forced me to be a quote unquote morning person. And then, of course, fast forward all these years, here I am doing morning radio for the last, what are we on now? Year 13, I think it is.
Wow. I guess what I was trying to get back to at the beginning was uh, Jason was talking about, and Mike DeLuise had talked about this too, that the morning show was kind of created to be an extension of the university and talking about university events and things like that. And Jason had mentioned there was a pretty strict structure and schedule to it. Was that what do you remember about that part of doing the thing? Because it wasn't a free form, hey, let's have fun and do wacky hijinks morning show. It was very much focused on we want this to be part of the brand of the university and the station.
Yeah, I seem to recall that it was sort of an infomercial, if you will, back before we even knew at that point what infomercials really were. And they would send us a schedule of events on and around campus and in the local community, and we would spotlight those. And certainly we had, a fairly straightforward, if memory serves, presentation of the news, both local, state, regional, and national. And obviously, my favorite part of contributing to all this was the very brief sports segment that I would do every
Mm,
once in a while, recapping what had happened, if not on campus, with any of the Hofstra back then Flying Dutchman teams, but the local teams. And given that it was the spring semester, we would have been transitioning from football. Super Bowl was held in late January back then, so we would have had the NBA, the NHL, and then eventually getting ready for opening day of the baseball season. We also had, and I don't remember the timeline of this league's schedule, but the United States Basketball League actually
mm,
had a team that played at the Physical Fitness Center. Remember, this is long before the Mac complex opened, the sparkling gym that we have now,
mm,
the house that Speedy built along with Jay Wright. Speedy Claxton, of course, the head men's basketball coach, now helped guide the uh, the basketball team to consecutive NCAA tournament berths. Um, I won't mention that we haven't been back since, but we did come close in 2020. We did win the conference tournament, but obviously the NCAA tournament never happened because of the shutdown, the
mhm.
COVID shutdown. But yeah, I seem to recall that it was generally sort of an infomercial for Hofstra University, and I didn't have a problem with that. Again, they were paying me, so I couldn't quibble. And we were both able, I think, to put our respective personalities on display. It certainly wasn't just a he said, then he said, then he said again sort of dialogue. There was
Right.
conversation involved, and certainly not the wacky, as you mentioned, the wacky morning shows of Z100 that that had come to be. But we had our fun, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure, but I just like to try to draw a line for folks who may only know the station in recent years or during the Bruce Avery era. That the connection between what went out on the air on 88.7 at the time was, at least in the day part between 7 a.m. and let's say 3 p.m., was highly directed by the university, and that there were definite mandates that went in. Whereas today, from what I understand, there's a lot more student freedom and a lot more flexibility. But it was mandated that you will play 5 or 6 hours of classical music, and you're going to do this morning show the way that we like you to do it, not necessarily what you as students would want to do. And it's the beginning of a change, I think, at the station. But I like to paint a picture of what it used to be for folks, and you were certainly a big part of that at the time, obviously being the one of the first co-hosts of the morning show.
It's funny. I'm
So.
thinking to myself, and I'm chuckling as I remember. I didn't consider it state radio. But now that you put it that way, Brian, it may well have been sort of Pravda Junior a little bit.
When I got in, I think Peter Ilya was hosting the morning show with Shauna Wharton. I think that was, and they would do some comedy bits. They would do some fun stuff, but it was definitely very Hofstra centric. And then I think by the time that I left, and I think the year after, I think it was Dave Koenig and Butch D'Ambrosio. They had sort of really shifted the gears in the early Bruce Avery days of like, we're going to do fun skits and we're going to have, a wacky morning show kind of thing. So it took some time for that to evolve. But in the words of the late great Dave Mock, he would often invoke the phrase the Kremlin and the Kremlin directives back then, that some things were coming down from on high that we had to do and we had to like, or else there perhaps wouldn't be as much funding. So, but you don't remember it that way quite as much.
Well, there are very many lost brain cells between then and now. So my apologies for the lack of clarity and memory.
Not at all, not at all. So you were saying that in our last conversation that you were working over at the Coliseum. You were doing concessions, you were doing sports broadcasting, and you're doing the morning show. And you alluded to this earlier. Not a lot of sleep. So how are you managing to pull all of this off? You had a lot of things to do.
Just like I do now, Brian. Nap time. No, it's true. I sleep when I can. I have I don't know where this came from. I suppose it's a skill in air quotes that I've developed over the years, but I can fall asleep fairly quickly and pretty much anywhere. And doesn't matter how bright it is with the light shining through the windows or how noisy it might be. I When I need to sleep, I can sleep, and it happens very often. Having worked split shifts for many, many years, a couple
Hmm.
of decades almost, um, I learned to catch a few Z's when I could, and it goes all the way back to my days um, at Hofstra with all of those things that were going on. And I would catch the occasional cat nap between classes, and still, it amazes me. I just mentioned this to someone the other day. I would read cover to cover back then, hard copy, usually 6 newspapers every day, and
Wow.
so how I found time for the cat naps is sort of puzzling looking back on it all. But here I am, proof that it worked.
All right, all right. Well, more power to you. That's good to hear. We've talked about a little bit of your time at Hofstra Radio and your a little bit about after Hofstra, but you have occasion to talk about WRHU. I'm sure many times. Is there a story that always comes to mind when someone says, "Oh, what was it like working at college radio?" Like, is there one story that always pops up for you?
Yeah, and it usually is among a handful of us the epic overnight slash illicit slash against the rules airwave broadcast that we did from somebody's dorm room. One of the last nights we were all on the air together in the spring of '88, and I remember doing the remote broadcast. We actually still have an air check cassette floating around amongst the many of us who participated. And there was a field trip, if you will, to Dunkin' Donuts, which was still right on the corner of
Hmm.
Hempstead Turnpike and California Avenue back then. I was shocked when I returned to the faculty a couple of semesters ago to find that Dunkin' Donuts no longer exists, because I've very rarely heard of a Dunkin' Donuts going out of business, but they moved. Anyway, in the middle of the night, made a field trip to Dunkin' Donuts for donuts and coffee. Brought back to the quote unquote party. I remember dropping in a sports update. There had been the Big Devils playoff game against the Boston Bruins that I was recapping, and some other things worth mentioning to an audience. And the outcome, of course, was that we had not asked for permission. It was one of those, better to ask for forgiveness than
Mm,
ask for permission. And so we did this. And I don't have the copy of the memo that went out to the staff um, in the wake of this, but Jeff Krause sent out a memo suspending us. And I believe there were 5 of us, maybe 6, who were suspended indefinitely, summoned to one on one meetings with Jeff. And again, this was right before graduation ceremonies, and obviously everybody heading off campus to, you know, begin the rest of their lives post graduation, but also for the people who weren't graduating. Very often, many would come back to help out in the summer because the
right.
station had very little staff on hand. And so I remember sitting in with Jeff in the office, which had been cleared out for our chit chat. And he very sternly, basically read the memo to me word for word. And when he finished, he had that very Krausian look on his face, and I was smiling, and he wanted to know what was so funny. And I said, Jeff, I understand you're upset, and I apologize that we didn't get clearance and everything else, but we didn't do anything technically illegal, no FCC violations, because the station has always been licensed, or at least back then, and continuing to now, licensed for 24 hours a day. So we didn't really do anything illegal. I said, I understand you're really mad, and you want to suspend us all. I said, but I'm going to remind you that you're going to need us to come back and help out over the summer. And
Mm,
with that, his consternation became even more consternated, if
mm.
that's a word. And I don't know if you remember Dean Wormer in the Animal House film,
Yep.
when he said, and I don't remember if I'm getting the line right, but the mood is very on point. I hate those guys. And he looked at me and he said, very Dean Wormer, like, I hate you guys. And I know he didn't, but
Right.
he was upset that I had caught him, sort of in a catch-22, that as much as he wanted to punish us, he couldn't. And so our indefinite suspensions didn't last for very long. And fast forward all those years later, and again, I don't have the hard copy in front of me to read off all the names, but I'm pretty certain if there were 6 on that list, then 4 of us are in the Hofstra Radio Hall of Fame. And if there were 5 on the list, then at least 3 of us are Hall of Famers now. So it all worked out in the end, and I'm only sorry that Jeff isn't around to enjoy our successes with us.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to hear his version of the story too. I'm sure he could I'm sure he could spin that yarn in a very entertaining way. It would
Yeah, no doubt.
be yeah. Um are there stories that you don't get a chance to share or that you've forgotten about or just, came back preparing for this interview that you wouldn't mind sharing about your time at Hofstra?
It's funny. If I could remember the ones I forgot, I think I'd be able to fill up an entire book.
Yeah.
I had a chance back in the fall, I think it was, to spend a day with our old sports director, Stu Rushfield, and there were a couple of things that came up in our time, as we reminisced about the days and went back to the old or I should say the office space, and really the studio space too, at Memorial Hall, under what was then called Bits and Bytes. I don't know if it's still called Bits and Bytes, but it looks much different now than it used to. And of course, the space that used to be occupied by WRHU and its offices is now repurposed for other things. But the office looked. Um, it was interesting to be back and listen to the ghosts of
Mm,
years past echoing. When we opened the window, you could almost hear the sounds of the old WRHU reverberating, um, down there, and it was. But as for stories, there really weren't terribly many that I could recall. We had, a bunch of us would go out and we had play-by-play announcer, color commentator. We didn't really do much sideline reporting because the technology wasn't in our favor back then. But I remember there was one of the first games that I was supposed to do color for. Um, I think originally it was a football. I know for some of our younger listeners, yes, Hofstra used to have football.
mm,
We were there was a playoff game at Hofstra Stadium, and I think it was against Fordham, and that might have been 1987. It was either Fordham or Wagner. I can't recall now. But I was originally supposed to do the updates during the game from the studio. And then whoever was supposed to do play by play, it might have been Tony Sabilla, came down with laryngitis. So it might have been, and again, I got the names right, but the particulars are still very fuzzy. Might have been Steve Goldman, who was supposed to do color for Tony. Tony got laryngitis. Steve wound up getting moved up to play by play. They asked me if I wanted to do color, and then I saw the weather forecast for that Saturday, and it was supposed to be verging on sub freezing. high winds, minuscule wind chill, real field temperatures. And I thought about it, and not a big winter guy. I am, morning guy, yes, winter guy, no. I, I think I'll stick with the updates. And it turned out it was probably the worst football game of the Mickey Kwiatkowski coaching era. The Flying Dutchman back then got their doors blown off. Game was over by halftime. I remember my grandparents had come in from Queens to watch in person, and they didn't make it past the second quarter, um, which I was fine with, because I said, if you're in the car or you're home, at least that I have some audience listening. We never knew how many people were actually
Right.
listening to our
Right.
broadcast, so I knew I'd have at least two sets of ears paying attention. But while they were at the game, they weren't following along on a transistor radio or anything. But I thought that was one of the smartest decisions I ever made, not to suffer the elements in the old press box, which was open air, basically a tin can, as opposed to the spacious accommodations they have now. So I thought I made the right call then, and looking back on it, I would, if I had it to do all over again, I would probably do exactly the same thing and stay inside.
Whoever the poor sucker was that wound up working with Steve that day. I don't know if you remember who it was, but I'm sure they would rather see the assignment switched.
It was some combination, Brian, of Stu Rushfield, Tony Sabilla, would have been probably Marshall Hausfeld involved, Steve Goldman, and the late Jack Stasinski, who I think we all miss dearly. Among that quintet, four of them, one of me, that was probably or five of them and one of me. My math is very fuzzy today. But among us, that was we cobbled some combination of play by play color and update anchor.
Hmm. Um, a moment ago, when you were talking about the old facilities and Memorial Hall in the basement, and you mentioned the sounds and sort of the cadence of it, and it completely came back to me that people would come down to the office and the typewriters were going, and there'd always be conversation. There was music. The station broadcast was on. Jeff had the stereo set up in the corner. There's always some amount of noise. And as soon as you mentioned that, it really came back. And I know every workplace has a distinct sort of sound and perhaps smell or whatever it is to it. But wow, that came back as you mentioned that. I haven't been back in that basement in a long time, but the memory, that sound is still in my brain. So thank you for bringing that back up. That was
Happy
cool.
to help.
And the occasional, Jeff would say, "Can we keep it down to a dull roar, please?"
Right.
And we'd all be on good behavior for 3 or 4 minutes, and then go back to it. But yeah, oh, that's a good memory. Thank you. Um, in your mind, is there a song or an event or a game that, in your mind, defines your time at Hofstra Radio?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mm, I do remember one trip I made. We did a men's and women's basketball doubleheader at Lafayette, so we got to go to Easton, Pennsylvania. That was one of the road trips that I actually had time to do, because with the class load and with working at the Coliseum, there wasn't really a whole lot of opportunity for me to travel, as some of the other guys did much more extensively. But I remember in particular that was a fun trip. Um, as far as any specific games standing out, it's funny. I was just back up at Fairfield University within the last 3 weeks, and I had not been on that campus since, and I looked it up, December of 1987. And they have a gleaming new athletics facility that their basketball team plays in. And when I walked in, the first person I saw was their color analyst on the broadcast that they do on ESPN Plus, and I reminded him that the last time I was there on the footprint where the old gym was, where this beautiful new facility is, he was an assistant coach.
Hmm.
And it was a Hofstra game against Fairfield that I went up for. I don't think I called the game, but I was definitely in the building. And he reminded me that his boss back then, the head coach, would actually be in attendance for that particular game. And so there was this whole reunion, which wound up being really fascinating. But as far as a specific game or any other event, I mean, really, the all night airwave marathon stands out more than
Yeah.
anything else. And it might just be, Brian, because I'm so often reminded of that night by by my fellow offenders and by others who were spectating or listening in wherever they might have been. That was, but that was one of those, that was one of those epic nights that, when you do start to forget things, and I guess we all do at some point,
Yeah.
that may be one of the last memories that disappears from my what I call my mental hard drive.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about how busy you were and trying to juggle all these things. Was there ever a time or a moment where I mean, I know you didn't go for a sports director, and part of that was because of your responsibilities of working. But was there ever a time where you thought, "Yeah, this isn't working for me. I want to walk away from the station. I want to do something different."
Oh no. No, because by then it was, I was a sophomore. It was right after the Mets had won the World Series. And I kind of knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I had been, and we all have, when we're young and in elementary school, we all go through what do I want to be when I grow up. And I often do a multimedia presentation when I meet a new group for the first time, whether it's students or any of the professional organizations that I've been involved with now for all of my professional career. But what do you want to be when you grow up? And you've
Mm,
got the gamut: fireman, policeman, doctor, nurse. I had one buddy who wanted to be an airline pilot. I wanted to be Bob Murphy,
mm-hmm,
and back then he was the and would remain for 40 some odd years the legendary play-by-play voice of the Mets, radio and TV. And I had plotted out from basically middle school that when I finished middle school, go to high school, go to college, work my way up through the minor leagues, much like baseball players do, that right about when Bob is ready to retire, I should be able to make a very seamless transition from wherever I was working as a AAA baseball announcer to the major leagues and Shea Stadium and replace Bob basically. And
makes
so
total
that
sense.
was the dream. And as I got ready to graduate and started putting feelers out for minor league jobs in the then New York Penn League, and I got a couple of offers, despite the fact that I had never actually called baseball because we couldn't do that at Hofstra. I would go to Yankee Stadium, Shea Stadium, sit in the upper deck with a tape recorder and record my own play-by-play. And every once in a while, I would have a partner with me to serve as the second voice, so that I could also do some color. And when I found out how much back then minor league baseball announcers would be paid, realizing that I only had 10 years to pay back my loans for 4 years of
Mm,
undergraduate education, I would have to live until I was about 112 to pay back all the loans at minor league baseball pay. And I said, okay, that's not going to work. So I took a detour for about 25 years. And then one day, opportunity knocked on the door. Would you like to fill in calling some college baseball? Absolutely. And I think that's when I got back into the play by play racket, and I really haven't left since. So I've been very lucky on top of everything I do for 1010 wins. And that's, that was one of the dream jobs too, to have the opportunity to call play by play for various college um, teams: baseball, softball, soccer, volleyball, basketball. I do some football now. And I've been at a minor league baseball team for most of the last 10 summers. I've been very lucky that I was able to find a way to get back, even if it's not replacing Bob Murphy. And I do pay homage to him when I sign on every broadcast the way he used to, which was, "Hi again, everybody." And so that's the least I could do to honor a guy who was so influential to me growing up, and harboring, dreams and aspirations to follow in his footsteps.
yeah. In our previous conversation, you mentioned getting involved at the station, and I think you went to an airwave show on a Sunday night, if memory serves, and
Yes,
you were you
absolutely.
you were there the next day, and you were all in, and I think I knew the answer to that, but thank you for entertaining the question. I want to jump back for a second, that talking about calling baseball when you were at a Hofstra. You said we couldn't do that. Were there technological limitations to what you guys could do, or what was the situation with calling games then?
Yeah, draconian limitations. The way it was, and for those of the younger generation, you don't know how lucky you are to have the technology right now at your disposal,
Mm,
because what we had was a phone line. And if there's no phone line, you can't broadcast. And so we had a line, obviously, that we used at the gym, the physical fitness center, for basketball. And we had the line at the stadium for football. And that was it. Um, Nobody, I think, at that time had thought to do volleyball or wrestling or anything else.
mm,
The one thing I did do, because I really wanted to do play by play in the spring semester, and the only way we could have done baseball would have been to physically run a telephone cord from the nearest jack in the gym across the little access road over to the baseball field.
hmm
Certainly not practical. Even if we put it up on a pole, the fear was somebody will come in with a truck and knock it down, and then what happens? And so I was limited to the gym, no spring sports, or the stadium, and there was lacrosse. I had never, Brian, at that point, even seen a lacrosse game, let alone thought about broadcasting lacrosse. And somehow I was able to convince the powers that be that we should broadcast home Hofstra lacrosse games, to allow anybody who was interested to branch out and add to their play by play demo tapes. So I got the go ahead and wound up going. There was an exhibition game, if memory serves, against Syracuse, which was then and
mm,
kind of still remains a Division One lacrosse powerhouse. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the coach these days was one of their star players back then. And so I went to the lacrosse game. I was very fortunate in that one of my friends was the then red shirted starting goalkeeper for Hofstra lacrosse. He had undergone back surgery, and I went and I actually bribed him to become my color analyst on Hofstra radio broadcasts of men's lacrosse. And of course, when I asked him if he would do it, sure, how much does it pay? And I said, well, it's college radio. We don't get paid anything. I said, but I'll buy you a case of beer for every game we broadcast. And that was it. So that made him a professional.
it makes sense. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, he wound up, after we graduated, he wound up actually doing play by play color, I should say, lacrosse color commentary for Sports Channel and some other outfits along the way. And I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning this, but right now, as we speak, he is the president of USA Lacrosse. And so I joke every time I see him or anyone who knows him that he owes me 10% of all of his broadcast earnings, because I was the one who got his career started. And he, one of his teammates, and we had a chance to call not very much of his involvement with the team back then, but one of his teammates is a guy who is now currently the head coach of the NHL's Tampa Bay Lightning, a fellow named John Cooper. And when Tampa Bay beat the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago to clinch a spot in the Stanley Cup final, I remember sitting in the Garden interview room, and before the cameras started rolling, I was maybe 5 feet in front of Coach Cooper, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I said, could you have ever imagined 30 some odd years ago, when we were at Hofstra, that you would be coaching in the Stanley Cup final? And
Mm,
it kind of blew his mind. And now he's a Stanley Cup champ, which I think not only blows his mind, but blows my mind too. From humble beginnings, and
yeah.
Hofstra had no hockey team. And it's amazing how the road changes in front of you, And if you don't make the adjustments, who knows what happens? But here we are, all these years later, guys still coaching in the NHL, and I am just overwhelmingly fortunate to be doing what I do.
Yeah, but I was saying this earlier, and your advocacy, your sense of community and helping people out and lending them a way to do it. It's evident that even as an undergrad, you were doing those things. I guess my next question, and it might relate to this somehow, or it might be something different. Do you have a proudest accomplishment or a biggest moment at Hofstra Radio?
Oh, I think just the fact that I was able to procure that paying gig as a co-host on Good
Mm.
Morning Hofstra. I joked when I was inducted into the Hofstra Radio Hall of Fame that were it not for Sue Zizza, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. And that's for better or worse. I guess if you're a fan of mine, you think that's a great thing, and if you're not in the fan club, then blame Sue, because she was the one who laid the groundwork for all this. The foundation begins at WRHU and Good Morning Hofstra, and I guess it's thanks to Jason Levy, who was a tremendous co-host. And I guess I have to. I'm going to call him out. I don't know if I have in the last 30 some odd years, but Charlie Tanner, who was one of our
Mhm.
classmates, also involved in the radio station back then. Um, Became overly frustrated with me about something and chucked a food tray at my head. And I suppose I'm very fortunate that he had lousy aim, because I am still here. Had he connected with that hard plastic tray, who knows what would have happened?
That's kind of a funny end to that little bit there, because I asked you about your proudest moment or biggest moment, and it's ducking that tray.
Yeah, the reflexes.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. Well, whatever it takes to survive in this business, I suppose. Um, you've mentioned a number of funny stories, and among the sports guy crowd, there's always these allusions to road trips and, oh, if you knew what we were doing behind the scenes, or if you could have seen us at this game. Is there a funny story that always makes you laugh, that always gives you a chuckle to this day?
Not really. I was a good boy on the road, because I wanted to make sure that if the opportunity arose, I'd be able to keep going on the road.
Hmm.
And so no, I was very well behaved. Back on campus, not so much, but
Right.
on the road, because I knew I was representing the school and the station. And again, because we had such limited opportunity, I wanted to make sure that if at all possible, I was representing myself and the station and the school in the best light possible.
Hmm. Um, I'm sure I know the answer to this question, but if you got a call from John Mullen or Kathleen Shortis and they said, "Hey, Mark, we need someone to come in and cover a shift or be on the air for a little while," would you be willing to jump behind the board or behind the microphone at
I,
WRHU?
I wouldn't know what to do with the technology they have now. I mean, if I have somebody working the board for me and all I have to do is talk into a microphone, I can do that. I do that every day. But as far as the technology goes, and actually, running a radio board these days, the one I use right now in my everyday life is fairly uh, basic compared to when I look at the board they have in the studios now. I used to joke that Hofstra's radio board was essentially Marconi's nightmare.
Hmm.
And then I got out in the real world and was stunned, Brian, to learn that we actually had it pretty good even then.
Yeah.
But now, of course, they've got state of the art technology, and I honestly have no idea how state of the art technology works.
All right. So if we got someone to push the buttons for you, second part of the question, you decide to come in. Are you going to do a talk show, or are you going to do a sport, cover a sporting event, a music show? What kind of program would you want to do?
I mean, the good news is I could pretty much do anything. I was mentioning to you before we started the interview that having gone back for a few semesters as an
Hmm.
adjunct, and walking into the space now and listening on the overhead speakers and hearing what I hear of WRHU's programming, it's on occasion when I'm there late morning, early afternoon, it's just like listening to Z100 or a station of that ilk, and certainly nothing like what we had back
Hmm.
in the day. And so I'm a little bit jealous that they get to enjoy, contemporary hits radio when that was anything but the case back
Right.
in our day. And so maybe just, for the sake of closure, I suppose might be the word, I would want to, play DJ for a little while and maybe spin some Taylor Swift or AJR.
That's a surprising answer, but we'll accept it. I figured you'd say, well, I want to get in and do that baseball game, or I want to call another thing. But that's why we put the questions out here for
Well,
this.
it's funny. I'll tell you the truth. I was supposed to do as a visiting broadcaster a game at a Hofstra baseball stadium last year, and because of space limitations, given the fact that it was early in the season, weather forecast was for winter-like conditions,
Yeah.
frigid. They had to have everybody inside who could be inside, including the camera crew. So there was no room for a visiting broadcaster. But I wound up going into the broadcast booth or into the press box at the baseball stadium a couple of weeks later, and realized that no, it would have been very cramped because you have the Hofstra broadcast crew and the public address announcer and everybody else on the stats crew, and it just would have been a jumble of noise to have another broadcaster in
Mm,
doing that. So you know what, if they needed a guest broadcaster to call Hofstra baseball one day, I would be thrilled to do it. um, but I have enough on my plate these days, especially in the spring with the college
yeah.
sports and eventually the minor leagues, that I don't know if I can squeeze another trip out to Long Island into the schedule.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. You've obviously had this amazing radio career, and you call these games, and you're involved in so many things. But is there, from your time at Hofstra as an undergrad, is there something that you miss from that time, or working with the undergrads?
I miss having the chance to read 6 newspapers a day cover to
Yeah.
cover. I can tell you that, boy.
Yeah.
Although, if you look at my transcript, you'll understand that maybe I should have budgeted that time a little better. Um, no, I think that it was everything. Maybe the only regret I have, Brian, or maybe I shouldn't say only. One of the maybe the biggest regret is not having started at WRHU earlier than I did. I
Mm,
was midway through my sophomore year, junior year. I guess I was in my junior year, and so I probably, looking back on it, if I had started day one freshman year, then I would have had the full 4 year experience instead of just a year and a half.
mm.
So there were 2.5 years, I suppose, that were lost opportunities.
Yeah, I think that leads into my next question: is if you could time travel for 60 seconds and meet yourself at 18 years old, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Go on day one.
Yeah.
Don't wait. No, it was, even with that, and again, everything happens for a reason. I've become an even bigger believer of that in the last few years than I was even back then, and I don't know how things would have turned out. So I know how things are now,
Hmm.
and given that path, again, it still would have been nice to have some support from people in the business. We have some pretty big names on our alumni list, and it would have been nice if we had more interaction with them. And
Hmm.
there may have been opportunities, I just don't remember.
Right.
So I'm not certainly not going to call anybody out for not giving back. And I wouldn't say that the way I do it is the right way. The other thing is, and I don't know if I mentioned this our first chat, I joked for years with the late great Ed Ingles that if he had shown up 5 years earlier than he did as a professional in residence when I was still an undergrad, that I would be Sean McManus, who is just
Mm,
now retiring as the president of CBS Sports. But
mm,
he ran CBS Sports and News. Coincidentally, for years, Roone Arledge, the same with ABC. But I joke with Ed because he had the connections at CBS that
right.
I would have been Sean McManus
Mhm.
maybe 10 years before Sean McManus if I had those connections, um, and was able to use Ed as a resource back then.
So many people who got to work with Ed, I didn't know him personally, but so many people have spoken so highly of him, and I guess you knew him in the professional world, and then both being mentors and advisors and professors. Is there anything that stands out? Uh, is there an anecdote about Ed that you wouldn't mind sharing? Because like I said, I didn't know the man, but I've heard so many wonderful stories about him that if you've got anything you wouldn't mind sharing, I'd love to hear it.
Well, at the time of our taping, Brian, he's gone now. It's just shy of 4 years.
Mm,
And I remember I mentioned this, and it got into a couple of the stories about his passing on TV and in print. And I remember saying that, were it not for the shutdown because of COVID, they could have not only filled St. Patrick's Cathedral for a memorial service, but they also would have filled the streets,
mm,
basically from Fifth Avenue to Third Avenue, and from 48th Street up to 59th. I mean, that's how many people this guy had an impact on. And the other thing was, and I definitely remember mentioning this to whoever would ask. I tried just on a lark to find someone who had a bad word to say about him.
mm, mm.
And Brian, I'm telling you, hundreds of people I solicited who I knew him one way or another, and not one bad syllable was spoken about this man. And it leaves a mark on you as someone who knows him. Obviously, I didn't know him as well as his family did, but just to have a guy live a life like that, two Hall of Fame careers, first as a
Yeah,
broadcaster and then as the professional in residence for WRHU, and the careers that he helped launch. Just look at some of the names of people who are out in the broadcasting world who made their way through WRHU with him in that office. And certainly Bruce Avery had a big hand, and John Mullen had a big hand, but I think Ed, we all stood on the shoulders of the giants at one time or another, and what Ed was able to do for the WRHU community and for the students and anybody who was interested in becoming a student or a broadcaster at that school in the time he was there, just so fortunate. And it really, even to this day, 4 years later, it still kind of stuns me that quite literally not one person had a bad word to say about the man.
yeah, yeah. I can't imagine it. It's everything I've always heard is glowing and uh, just a man with a big heart and so much to give, and what a talented and amazing guy. So thank you for sharing
And I
that.
laugh because I'm
Mm.
thinking now, people who are going to be listening back to this, and they're going to be thinking exactly the opposite. Like, Ernay, you have no shot. That we can send you, 10 lousy things about you right now. And and I'm okay with that. I've tried to be a better person over the years. I think it's working to a degree. I will certainly never be up for sainthood, but and that suspension letter will probably be buried with me from Jeff Krause. But he spelled my name wrong, and I reminded him that the Mark with a K is suspended, but I don't know who that is. Um,
Oh, that's funny.
yeah, but no, I honestly, as far as memories of the station go, there's nothing really. Unfortunately, there's nothing so vivid that I can pinpoint it and say that was the moment.
Mm,
But it was just the overall experience was one that I would never trade.
mm, mm. Um, the question I usually ask to round up, I think you've answered already, but you've obviously had this career in radio and all the connections. Are there specific lessons that you took or experiences from Hofstra Radio that have served you in your career in your adult and professional life?
Do as much as you can, learn as much as you can, ask as much as you can, because you don't know everything, even if you think you do. And just, you don't have to decide today what you want to do with the rest of your life. That was one of the things. And again, goes back to I want to be Bob Murphy when I grow up.
Hmm.
I'm not Bob Murphy, and I'm okay with that. Had I wanted to become a doctor or a lawyer, obviously my path would have been different, but I think that the way things worked out is the way they were supposed to work out. And like I said, I'm okay with that. I'll look back, when I eventually retire, which probably won't be anytime soon, frankly. But that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that I love what I do, and
Hmm.
there's not a day that I wake up and dread, having to go to work and do what I do. That's I picked the most perfect vocation for me, knowing that if I had a real job, in air quotes, working 9 to 5, that I would be staying up every night, absorbing all of these games in one way or another anyway. So why not just cut out the middleman and watch sports for a living and talk about watching sports for a living. So it all worked out really well. But no, to answer your question, I mean, really, that's it. It comes down to learn as much as you can, do as much as you can, and find what makes you happy. And it's such a played out cliche, but if you do something you love, it's not work. And
Mm.
again, it's trite, but it's true.
Yeah. No, I think I think you're right, and you found a way to do the thing that you loved. It may not have been what you envisioned when you were in elementary school, but it certainly, I think, provided a good career and made you happy for a long time, and made a lot of us happy. We love listening to you, and I love these stories. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk, and I look forward to catching up in person one of these days. This has been great. Thank you so
It will
much.
definitely happen in person, Brian. I can guarantee that. And yeah, it was a blast to chat again. And anybody else who might have the opportunity to relive their RHU days, please share. This series has been great. I love listening to not just my own fellow classmates and colleagues at RHU back in the day, but hearing from the prior generation and the more recent generations. It's really a treat to hear everybody's perspective and know that that little radio station is the common bond that we all share.